So my goal today is twofold. One, I thought I would give you, well, basically we can talk about whatever you want to, because it's your time and I can try to answer whatever questions you have, so please feel free. If I don't know the answer, I can probably help figure it out. And so I was going to talk a little bit, I don't know if you've seen in the news that there's some drugs that are getting approved and some that are getting, but also to just talk a little bit about what is a clinical trial, what does stage whatever mean, how do you evaluate whether you should do it or not, just for your own, I mean, because we're all getting older. As we go through the medical system, people may come up to us, especially if you're at LSU, and say, hey, will you be in this study? And so what do you do? How do you evaluate whether it's a good idea or not? And so I can talk a little bit about that. Sound good? Okay. I made a couple copies and I can make some more if you're interested. This is an article that just came out in 318 Forum about this topic that I wrote with a public health student. Excellent. Okay, so starting out, what is a clinical trial? So a clinical trial is, there's all kinds of medical research. A clinical trial is specifically something that is testing the efficacy of a drug or a device. Need 3 more?
Okay.
Okay. I can text.
Mm-hmm.
3 more.
I'll go get it.
Okay. So there are different stages. So there are different stages of clinical trials. If you turn to that first page, right here. No, yeah, it's on the first page right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So what normally happens is there are preclinical studies in animal models. I could probably talk for an entire session about animal model studies. What we do is we induce a disease in an animal and then we try to cure it. A lot of the times, the disease that we've induced doesn't actually mimic the human disease very well. And so, especially in Alzheimer's disease, we've seen a lot of activity in animal models that didn't sort of think of it as fall to the human side. So we've been trying to make that leap from animal models to the human side for decades. It's been very difficult. So we don't have a great animal model. Although we're getting better, they can do genetic manipulations and all this crazy stuff. We're still not.
Because it's the mind.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
right.
the brain. Well, and it's neurodegenerative, and we don't know exactly why.
Yeah.
So if we want to do a stroke model, we go in, we close off one of the vessels in the mouse brain, and the mouse has a stroke, and that is the same as in a human, right? So that it's not perfect, but it's a lot closer. Since we don't know why we have Alzheimer's, it's hard to recreate it in a mouse model. So we've spent a lot of time there. Now we're finally getting some drugs that have made it over the wall. Okay, so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. And so the phases are important. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, will you be in a phase 1 study of a particular drug? Phase 1 is really looking at safety and tolerability for different doses in a particular, I guess phase 2 is doses, but phase 1 and phase 2, there's a lot of safety involved. So if the person, if you're approaching someone who has a terminal illness, brain cancer, and it's a phase 1 or phase 2, and their life expectancy isn't too long, then you might consider a phase 1 or phase 2. If you're having some sort of gallbladder problem, which isn't fatal, and they ask you about phase 1, then you really need to learn more about what the side effects are and carefully consider the risk-to-benefit ratio to you. I mean, I always want to help with science because that's what I do for a living, but my rule of thumb is, would I enroll my mom in this trial? And so all the trials that we choose to do meet that criteria for me. I would enroll my mom in them, and not all trials are like that, and so that's kind of a rule of thumb.
So they give you that when they ask you.
So
They give you the phase.
Yeah, so the rule is they are supposed to, and I actually just did this with somebody who's participating in one of our other studies. There's a thing called the consent form. So they go to some sort of an IRB, an internal review board, where they're legally, we are legally required to say, what are the risks? Boom, boom, boom. What are the benefits? That paragraph's usually fairly short. And then, why are you being asked to be in the study? How long will you be in the study? So that consent form should say the phase on it. You should, and you are required to be fully cognizant of what is going to happen and what your risks are. And also the other big thing that I impress on people is you sign the consent sheet, and that means that you understand what the consent sheet says. It doesn't mean that you have to do it. You're not signing a contract to perform the study. You're signing a thing that says, yes, all my questions were answered and everything. So you can always drop out at any time of any study. There is no risk to your care being changed or any sort of, emotion, like people getting mad at you or whatever. We all agree. You can, even with the studies that we do, which are very non-invasive, I hammer that really hard, that you can quit at any time with no repercussions whatsoever. So phase 2 gathers more data on effectiveness and dosage. And then phase 3 compares the treatment to existing options or to a placebo in a larger group. And so what we're seeing in the news are the results of some phase 3 trials for a couple of drugs that I think more we are.
I told that.
So what we're seeing in the news are results from phase 3 trials that are attacking beta amyloid, or the misfolded protein that makes up plaques, in a couple of different ways. And so then groups are trying to get FDA approval, and then we go to stage 4, where we do long-term safety in really big groups after initial FDA approval. Therefore, sometimes people talk about a phase 5. We follow people for a long time, because sometimes it takes a while for, I think in Alzheimer's disease, usually that's toward the end of someone's life, but if you're doing something with a child, you follow it quite a long time.
Is there a way to not be on the placebo side of things if you're desperate to try?
Yeah, so no.
That's the point, though.
That's a really good question.
That's a good question.
And so that's another important thing to look at if you're evaluating. If there is a current treatment, then usually what we try to do is the control group will get current treatment and the intervention group will get current treatment plus something, so a lot of times if you think about cancer, they'll add in something that they think will help and study it that way. And we're sitting here worried about Alzheimer's disease. We don't have any treatment. So the placebo kind of is the current treatment, which is nothing. But nobody wants to do that.
Mm-hmm. But the comparisons must be incredibly hard to understand when one's a placebo, one's not, and this person is functioning on a time span and this person is too. And how do you recognize?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's very complicated. So the other problem is, in humans, people come in and with diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, these neurodegenerative diseases, they've been going on for a while before we see any changes. And so we don't even know when it started or where they are. So not only do people travel at different trajectories, we don't know where we're starting.
Right.
So that's called, so I teach statistics at LSU, and so we're trying to mathematically account for all this stuff, and that's called noise.
That's AI, right? Yeah. No.
Well, that's a new way to look at the data. That's it's going to end up being more sophisticated. Where maybe ultimately we would be able to get away from the control group if we can add in all the different, lipids, heart disease, family history, genetics, if we can build a model that's complicated enough, that includes all that information, maybe we could change the way that we do this. It's a little more humane. Because I agree with you. We had signed up here at LSU to do one of the first ones, the aducanumab, I think. It was a 5-year study, and there was a placebo control, and there were all these other drugs coming out, and I just and we have since so aducanumab was one of the first ones. So what you probably, if you've seen anything in the news, is the one where they granted it approval, then half the FDA quit, that was on the committee, and it was very contentious. And so that issue was that the clinical gains were not huge. The side effects were significant. Brain swelling, brain bleeds. So,
Yeah.
does that pass the test for me signing my mom up? No, it does not. And my mom has Alzheimer's now, so I would I would desperately love to get her some treatment, but I don't know. She has a cardiovascular stroke family history, and so she just would be terrible for that.
And the different kinds of injury to the brain can massively change dramatically the whole scenario.
Correct.
And, I mean, if it's a traumatic concussion, your brain is swelling, or, you have different effects than whatever blockage or whatever you're talking about.
Right, so the disease is really heterogeneous, that's another problem. So another point about these beta amyloid drugs is if you or your loved one or your family member doesn't have a buildup of beta amyloid, which they might not, then the drug won't help them. And so they are pretty good with this, where they'll do a PET scan to make sure before enrolling somebody in one of these beta amyloid trials that they actually have beta amyloid, that's a major strength of these drugs.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
When my husband participated in a study, a couple of years ago, and I don't know if this was one of the first studies that or have you?
You mean here?
Yeah,
With us?
with you,
Okay.
yeah. And I never really understood what that was.
What we were doing?
Yeah,
Okay. So we're looking at the cardiovascular side of Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
So we know that high cholesterol, high blood pressure,
right,
diabetes, all risk factors.
right.
And the cardiovascular center here at LSU found a molecule in the blood, hydrogen sulfide, that was linked to cardiovascular disease. And so we got a grant to look at it in Alzheimer's disease. And it turns out that it was really high in all the folks who had, we weren't even able to separate out vascular dementia versus Alzheimer's disease we just took everybody who was having a memory problem and it was elevated in everyone. So, and as the score went down on the memory test, the hydrogen sulfide went up. And then since then, we took the brain images. Did your husband do an MRI? Okay, well, I can give you these papers if you want, because he's in there. Cortical thickness went down, and so brain atrophy was worse. So we're looking at maybe a blood-brain barrier issue that becomes leaky, and it's because it was really widespread throughout the brain. We were expecting it maybe to just be in the hippocampus where the memory is, but it was the whole brain.
And since then, he had a stroke, and I'm sure that's.
Okay. Yeah, it may be related. So that's what we're doing, is we're trying to find a blood marker that you can test, like when you go get your cholesterol or your blood pressure checked, but you could also have this checked, and because there's a pretty clear cutoff when people start getting into trouble with their memory. We were able to discriminate between groups and say, okay, this level is where people start to have problems. So we could actually, ultimately the idea is to have another test that you can do in your doctor's office.
So are your clinical trials, your ongoing are you accepting do you want patients
Mhm.
to go in? Okay.
So we're,
So what do we need to do to?
I will sign up, I will sign you guys up. What we're doing now is we're looking at, so we're not even doing a clinical trial at this point, we're not doing any intervention.
Mhm.
So kind of circling back to what I was talking about before, we're just doing, not just, but we're doing medical research. So we're not testing a drug or anything, we're looking
Right.
for a biomarker, so the risks go down to, people get annoyed when they take the tests, they get an
Mhm.
MRI, and they get a blood draw. So minimal risks. And what we're doing now is we're looking at it over time, so we would love to get your
Yeah,
husband.
I
to
would
come back.
love to see what his brain looks like now.
I wanna do that too, because Gail, were you in the control group? Because I participated as well.
I was.
Okay,
And because last time it was just, it was the memory test, it was the blood
Yeah,
draw
it was
and the
pretty
MRI.
long test, or
Yeah.
memory test that they
still
did.
is that.
And it was wonderful because Medicare doesn't pay for those
Correct.
things, so
Correct.
with this, you get it and then your physician gets.
Yes, so we
has
write a
access to
summary
it.
of your tests, and we can
Mhm.
actually get your old summary
Mhm.
and send them both to your doctor, so they don't have to.
Mhm.
Sign us up.
Okay, all right, well, after this, we can
Yeah.
sign you up, yes.
The hydrogen sulfide test, that's not given to every patient, that's just given in your trial.
That's what we're studying right now.
That's all- it's
That's
not given
correct.
in
It's not
anything else.
clinically available yet, no.
You know, my husband doesn't have high cholesterol, or he takes a 10 milligram tablet, very mild. He doesn't have high blood pressure, it's always perfect. He doesn't have, he has his dad's side of the family died of heart attacks or heart disease, but his grandfather of that group was 93, perfectly healthy. And it's like, okay, there was like 6 kids in the family. One girl, all of them died of heart attacks except one who died of lung cancer because he smoked. My husband is like his mother, her side of the family, 98, 99, 97, all older, and can't find any relation to him having this problem.
Unfortunately, that's most
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see, I know that his brain is getting worse, I know that, and I don't know how far along he is, but it's getting to a critical point for me.
Right.
It's not catchy though.
I don't know, sometimes I feel like, so I'd like to be.
Sometimes I feel like it too.
If you can study some of the stuff from him, I'd like to do that.
Okay, all right, and maybe, maybe you might want to talk with Laura about
Yeah.
options
Mm.
for,
I have,
We have.
okay.
we need to do it again.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, if it's upsetting you, it's
It
maybe
is.
time for a change. Yeah, you need some
Unfortunately,
more help.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very distressing. We just moved my mom into
Yeah.
assisted living. She is mad. It's very
I
distressing.
don't know that you'd even notice, other than if I'm not there. My cousin watched him, and if I wasn't there, cause I went to the gym, he would go around and she'd go, Bill, who are you looking for? He goes, Jerry. She goes, well, she went to fitness lady. He went, how do you know? She said, cause she called me.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he'd sit down. So if I'm not there, he's lost.
Right. We actually were just talking about this the other day, that they tend to focus on their support person.
Mhm.
And
For
in a
good
way
or for
it's good,
bad.
it helps them, but it is
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
It is exhausting. My dad is my mom's person, and if he's not there, she is highly agitated.
yeah,
Mhm.
he does.
Yeah,
And
they
if he is
all-
there,
all
she's
different
he's
too, aren't they?
agitated.
Yeah.
That's me.
Mm-hmm.
She's
Oh, wow.
agitated him.
Well, so one of the, I can tell you a little bit about the beta amyloid drugs, but the other one that just got approved for anxiety is Rexulti. Did you read about that?
Heard.
Mm-mm.
It's
Yeah.
an existing drug that's been used for a while.
That's on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exalted.
I've
Yes.
heard that on TV and
Right,
that, yeah.
and so it's called an off-label use, so it was originally not designed for people with
Right.
Alzheimer's, but they've now tested it in people with Alzheimer's and dementia and decided that it's safe and effective for that sort of
For agitation.
free-floating agitation. Yeah.
So you're saying it's for anxiety?
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously prescription, and so you should ask your doctor about it, but I've been in a couple
Okay.
state and national forums where they've been talking about it, and so. Sort of
Is it old enough to where it has a generic?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't think it is. It's relatively new.
I don't even know what class it is, I should have looked it
I
up.
don't either.
Probably a class model.
And it's just to rejuvenate some, I don't know what it does. What
It takes the edge off of that, it's probably,
Takes the edge off,
I'm
okay.
gonna say it wrong, I'm just gonna Google it. Why not?
Rexalted?
Just do some research of it.
Exalted.
I don't, REXALTY.
I think it's
that's-
REXULTI.
Oh,
I
thank
think.
you. Thank you.
I think.
Yes, it is,
Yeah,
to,
these doctors that have to get the plug from the pharmaceutical reps must go through a lot.
I don't have good,
I go through the V.
do you wanna look at this? I can't, I'm not getting great.
Here.
My frustration was the donut hole,
What's
that,
that?
if it's not generic, Medicare won't pay, and
Yeah.
it's, very frustrating. And samples are limited.
Yeah, so apparently Rexulti is one of those adjuvant treatments for if you're treating depression.
Oh,
That's why it's on TV.
yes, that's it.
Um,
I remember.
I think just to give you an example of what I'm going through, my wife was at the beginning of this dementia syndrome or whatever it is. She came to be very depressed
yeah, I mean,
because immediately it's something that's affecting them and they don't know what it is and they don't know how to handle it. So all I could do is try to prevent the depression by being, better at caregiver. And it worked. It didn't work for a while, but it started to work now. It's sinking into me how to encourage the good. Always, always, always. No matter if it isn't, just do it. And they feel much better.
right, reassured in the moment, and that's what they have is in the moment.
In the
In the
moment.
moment, thank you. Yeah. Just the way it is with us sometimes.
Yeah, and we had, Tipa Snow came out and spoke at our last meeting. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
Were you there?
No.
Um,
I haven't been.
It was great because, I mean, this is. way
Here
off
at the
topic, but-
bridge. you're talking-
No, the annual.
Okay.
Oh, the conference.
Symposium,
Oh,
conference.
yeah.
Yeah, our last conference. Yeah, it was Beth Nolan was one of Tipa
Yeah.
Snow's higher up, basically.
Yeah, her group came out and
Practitioners.
spoke about their philosophy, but what she said that really, she said a lot of really good things, but what resonated with me for my mom was get them doing what they like to do before. So, right, she's in this home, she's away from, she
Yeah.
can't really cook or whatever, but she liked to shop, so she likes to
Yeah.
be around people, she likes to go out to dinner, she was very social, and, when
Yeah,
you're
do what they like.
demented, your friends kind of. So we just take her everywhere with us. We go to the store. She talks to the clerk. It almost doesn't matter who it is. She just needs to talk to people.
Yeah.
And that's helped a lot.
Well, I took my wife to Ireland.
Oh, my.
Saved a lot of stress. Believe me.
Oh, me leaving her
It's
behind.
gorgeous. No billboards, sheep, everything green.
We did that too.
Did you?
It's beautiful.
Well, anyway, I'm talking too much.
No, you're good. So we know what a clinical trial is. We know what the stages are. The main thing is to look at what the side effects are of the drug, ask plenty of questions. How long will they have to do it? So a lot of these drugs that we're talking about for the beta amyloid are infusions every 2 weeks for a long time, and it's unbelievably expensive. It's
Mhm.
56,000 a year or something like
Oh,
that.
my.
So, so Rexulti, the nice thing about that is we can get it outside of a clinical trial now, because it's called this off-label
Yeah.
medication. Were you able to look it up?
It's Abilify.
Okay.
It's an antipsychotic, but now a non-generic. Abilify went generic.
Vilify is the non-generic one.
And it
No.
makes people very restless. Abilify does.
Uh,
They can't sit down. They have to walk.
Mm.
Mine's not.
Yeah.
Mine uses
Already
fluoxetine for his moods, but that's what he takes 2 a day. And but it doesn't seem to help. Yeah, a lot of times at nighttime, he'll sit there and he'll just start crying. What's wrong? Some parents. His parents have been dead, his mother's been dead 13 years. And his dad longer than that. And it's like, they got in the car and they went in the water. We buried them in a lake, we poured their ashes in the lake. And he remembers that because he was with us.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the only thing I can think of. They drove a car and they went in the lake.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's like sadness that's attached to something sort of tenuous,
I don't know
but
what else to do.
sadness is probably, pretty understandable.
Just be in the moment with him. And when he gets to be sad, ask him like you did, ask him what's wrong, how he feels, what's making him feel that way, and just being in that moment, and that'll help that sadness pass.
I have another question. What do you all do when they repeat the same thing
Oh dear.
every time, and they bring it up again and then they repeat it, and then you go, oh dear.
Just work on your
No.
patience. Good Lord, that's.
Boy, is that hard
terrible.
for me.
Oh, that's hard.
It is. It is hard. Well, that's.
Agree, and they
Okay, so, so we can talk a little bit about the specific drugs that have come out. So the first one was aducanumab, where folks,
Did you get those somewhere that we, could you have them spell?
Is that what you passed out?
We'll get some more
Yes.
copies of the article. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll get some more copies.
Okay.
I'm gonna look up and get the spelling for you of that one. I'm dyslexic and my spelling is terrible.
That's on this?
That's
Yes.
a good thing. That means you're intelligent. So they all say that.
Let me go get a few more copies.
You know my shortcomings.
Can I ask a question
Yes,
about
ma'am.
Airset?
Sure.
Is it still the drug of choice for this? I keep seeing so much bad about it, and I.
Well, Aricept doesn't treat the underlying pathology. Is it mess with serotonin? Do you remember which one?
What's the,
Is it hurting the patient?
No,
I keep seeing stuff.
I don't think it is.
no, Aricept is the one that the doctor will start first in the office to slow it down.
I just wonder if it's really doing anything.
It
I
just
think
can't-
some
it
people-
can't fix it. It can't fix the dead cells, but it can slow down.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. Yeah.
And it helps with attention, I think. So some people do notice a difference and some people don't.
What's the one, the gave Bill one when he first started, and there was 2 drugs in it. He takes Memantine, Namenda, but there was another one that they had given him before, but he took one and it made him sick, so they took him off of that and put him on the Namenda.
It was probably Aricept and Namenda mixed,
Yeah, he
and so
didn't
they
do
just
well
gave
with
him the
that.
Namenda.
Yeah, he didn't do well with that.
Yeah, it's trial and error.
Because the mechanisms can be so different in different people, and so different things are gonna work, different things are gonna not work. And
they experimented with, I hate to say it, shock therapy?
I don't think they've experimented with
Lately, I mean,
Shock therapy is very bad for Alzheimer's. It's
Is
good
it?
for depression, but it's very
Okay.
bad for Alzheimer's.
Because-
In fact, it'll give you some memory problems if you don't
Ooh.
have it. And temporary ones.
Oh, yeah, I figured.
But we do know that they're looking at, so this beta amyloid's kind of the thin end of the wedge. There's people looking at mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are the energy powerhouses in your cells. They're looking at inflammation. We know that neuroinflammation is bad, and so exactly how is it related to Alzheimer's disease? It may turn out that all these different mechanisms, different people have different amounts of these mechanisms, and that it's, or that we're actually looking at several different diseases, and so we're still,
Yeah,
technology is really pushing forward to try to look at some of these things, and there's a lot of really smart people. So, your husband's, you don't know why your husband has Alzheimer's disease, but I can tell you there's a lot of people. The government is pouring grant money into this problem. And you may have seen recently there was some press about how the whole beta amyloid theory was maybe not as strong as we initially thought. And I think beta amyloid is going to be a part of it, but I think there's going to be some other really important mechanisms that haven't gotten as much attention as the beta amyloid story, but they are now. So
Right.
we're moving forward on a lot of different fronts.
in cancer now, they're finding drugs, that I understand, that pinpoint the actual cancer and destroy it. This is another thing that I think might work in the brain. If you think about it, why not? If they're directing, if you can find the direction and you can find the stoppage, you may be onto something, I don't know.
So for cancer, they look at the genetics of the tumor,
Yeah.
and then they match the drug to the tumor. It used to be if you had colon cancer, they gave you one drug, but now they're finding that you could have a similar genetic tumor somewhere else in your body, and then so they're having some success of, going by the genetics instead of by where it is in your body, things like that.
Yeah.
The problem with dementia is
Yeah.
there's no tumor to look at the genetics for, right? It's the
That's
whole, so that
But if
is
they're plaque, it's plastic, some sort of like,
Right.
yeah, so.
what we have now is a whole basket of risk factors for various things that we don't have a clear understanding of genetics of all the risk factors either. So
Yeah,
we're, in some ways it's really exciting, in some ways we still have a ways to go. Yeah. So I found aducanumab, how to spell it. It's called, oh no, that's not the right one. That's the other one. Okay. ADUCANUMAB.
What kind?
One more time.
ADUCANUMAB. So that's the one that we were signed up for here, Biogen. It was a long study that was placebo controlled. And that's the one that got approved, and then they pulled it back. The price tag for it was huge. It tapped into this thing about the FDA is now is using Alzheimer's drugs to push back a little bit because they've had a lot of drugs for other diseases sort of fast-tracked and approved that don't actually do anything, and then Medicare pays for them, and so they're trying to get rid of that. They're worried, and I think legitimately so, that if we get an Alzheimer's drug that's not really effective, it's super expensive and everyone has to have it, then we as a country will become bankrupt because, and we'll still have all these huge problems. That people
except for the
take
drug
care of.
companies.
Right, except for the
Yeah.
drug people.
More fast.
That's okay.
And in the drug companies' defense, they've been spending millions of dollars on drug development for years, and they've made $0. So that is not a good business model. So I get it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we can't,
Well, if the-
we
if the
can't make up for
government-
that.
If the government took over the drug making, maybe we could, spend too much for appliers just like they do already. I don't know. But we don't know what's gonna happen to being able to afford anything.
Right, and it is a weird, it is a weird balance, I think. The capitalism is driving the discovery.
Yeah, it is.
We need that. On the other hand, it's easy to abuse a situation like that where people are desperate for whatever the drug is and et cetera, et cetera.
So
So
let's go to Mexico.
there needs to be some oversight, but I think we need to keep the capitalism side. It's the fuel that's driving the engine, as fast as people can do it, so. Because a lot of other countries don't have that. We're kind of the leader there. So, clinical gains were minimal, and there was a lot of swelling and bleeding. It was normally pretty mild, but not always.
Is this the one that came out about a year ago? This drug you're talking
Yes.
about, and then was approved and then not approved?
Yes, once they put the price tag on it, then
Yeah.
it was
Mhm.
tenuously approved after a lot of fighting, and then they said, oh, we're gonna charge a lot of money for it, and then they said, okay, wait a minute. They can't do that.
Well, I had asked Dr. Harris about it, and she wouldn't prescribe it. She
Yeah.
said that one patient
That's what I'm saying.
just demanded it. She said, but I don't wanna prescribe it.
Yeah, they didn't like him,
Mm-hmm.
the neurologist didn't like it.
Right, the
Yeah.
side effects are pretty significant, and it's so costly, and of course insurance doesn't cover it. So now Medicare will only cover these drugs if you're in a clinical trial,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
which makes sense. They want the information, like we need more data. So it's tough, but
It is.
we're working on getting some of them here so that we can participate in clinical trial. And so we bowed out of the aducanumab trial, but I know that Dr. Kelly at LSU is trying to get into some of the other ones. And they're looking for people, and we have a really diverse population here, and that's very attractive because we want to make sure that the drugs work in everybody, because they're different, and African Americans are twice as likely to get it, more likely to be linked to the diabetes, cardiovascular, so that group may need a different treatment. Almost certainly does.
Another stumbling block, really. It's tough, isn't
It's very noisy. You call that? It's very noisy. Statistically
That's
noisy.
great.
So let's see. So there's a new one that just got it approved called Leqembi or lecanemab, Lecanemab.
Again, please?
Lecanemab.
New.
So this one is available for no clinical trials have started yet. But it's only paid for if you're in a clinical trial, and we're working on
What
trying
is
to.
it, what is it?
It's another beta amyloid one. It's a little bit different action, a mechanism of action than aducanumab, which is some of the other ones, which are immunotherapy, where your immune system attacks the beta amyloid. This one blocks the formation of plaques. Again, it has some swelling and bleeding side effects, it looks like less than aducanumab, 13 to 14%, still pretty high,
Mm-hmm.
1 in 10, still pretty high. But the upside of this one is that there's published results in the New England Journal. They showed a slowing of about 27% in terms of cognitive decline. And so they looked at normally aging people and also, I believe, a placebo control.
Well, the good thing about the new drugs is that once they use them, they can adapt them if necessary, huh?
Right, we learned.
You learn all the time.
Yeah, so that's the balance. We learn more, but do you want
Yeah.
to be the one
To
learned
be the
on.
guinea pig.
No,
So you have to assess the risk to benefit ratio there. And then the Lilly drug is called donanemab. They're all mabs.
yeah.
Donan.
I think I saw it here.
EMAB.
Yeah.
Mab.
That's
Mab.
Eli Lilly.
Yes, that's Eli Lilly.
Mab.
That's also an immunotherapy one. And they had a strange interaction with the FDA, which was this one's a single infusion, which is great, right? Single infusion. They didn't collect enough data according to the FDA. They stopped giving people the drug because their levels went down. So they got some letter, they were not given accelerated approval for the drug. They need more data. So I think they're going back to the drawing board and doing some more studies.
Is this all antidepressant, depression type of drug? Or, oh no, it's not.
These are beta amyloids,
These
yeah.
are beta, yeah.
These are all
Sorry,
beta
yeah.
amyloids, drugs. And I didn't take the numbers of them, but there are some tau, so those are the tangles. There's some drugs, but they're in phase 1 and 2. They're in earlier phases. But if you want to look and see what clinical trials are in your area, so this has some of the clinical trials that are available in our area. And you can look at clinicaltrials.gov. That's the federal government. Everybody from all over the country registers their clinical trial in that database, and it can be on anything. And then the Alzheimer's Association also has I think it's Trial Match or Trial Finder, something like that, has a Alzheimer's specific search engine for clinical trials.
So is it true that all of these medicines that are coming out are going to work the best for in the very, very beginning to like stave off that that mild cognitive impairment or give you that longer mild cognitive?
Well, so far we've only tested them in the beginning.
Okay.
So that was the idea, was to go after the early stage folks. So we don't know. It seems likely that that's going to be the case because once that cascade of cell death starts, slowing
Right.
that down is hard. It's going to be harder than maybe preventing it in the beginning.
Yeah, because once they're gone.
Right.
But if you can stop them from dying too quickly at the very beginning, then you can still have a relatively
Really slow down the process.
quote unquote normal.
But if you have
Okay.
a comparison of MRIs, that would help, wouldn't it? If you got a prior MRI and you can see if there's been any decline.
Changes.
Mhm.
Yeah, changes.
Yes. And again, it's going to depend on what role beta amyloid plays in the individual patient's disease.
True.
So it's a hydrogen sulfide, basically, some kind of,
That's the biomarker that we're looking at. We know that it is abnormal in heart disease. There's a couple different forms of it, and one form really goes down in heart disease, and when we age, and in heart disease. But what we found was that the other forms went way up in Alzheimer's disease, like way up.
So what kind of, what did you call that?
A biomarker?
No, the sulfide.
the hydrogen sulfide.
Right, hydrogen sulfide goes down in heart disease.
Okay.
And it's a vasodilator and some other things. And so what we found was that some of the metabolites of hydrogen sulfide go way up. So it may be,
So that's what you're bringing up.
maybe that our working hypothesis is that we're looking at a compensatory mechanism where your body's trying to produce a lot of hydrogen sulfide, and what we're getting are these sort of byproducts. And that hydrogen sulfide is being consumed to try to like put out the fire
Right.
of the cell death.
Huh.
And so
Huh.
we're working on different ways to try to test that hypothesis, but the more we pull on it, the more complicated it gets. we found one of the enzymes that makes hydrogen sulfide is also way up, so that kind of supports our theory. But the brain is also shrinking, so it's not necessarily working that well, and
It's just one
You answer
thing.
one, you get 10 more
Yeah.
questions.
exactly,
You
they're
know,
harder to answer.
Yeah.
I have a brother that had some, a very unusual frontal temporal lobe problem, back when he was 50, he's now 75 or 8. And, they put him on, at the Mayo Clinic, some drugs that, they thought would work, and for many, many years, it didn't look like it was doing anything. In fact, it wasn't doing him any good. It didn't seem like, when he took, he actually got himself off those drugs. And he felt better, he felt more normal and all that, so I don't know, it's so preliminary. If there's a cure, there's a cure. If there's not, there's drug tests and trials. So we're doing it, aren't we?
We are,
That's
we're
great.
trying, it's complicated, but we're trying. And
Yeah.
you guys are helping.
Thank you.